which is working and promoting a new kind of economy in Devon, one which prioritises sustainability and economic security, and of course, biodiversity. So today we're very pleased that we have several speakers with us. We, in Transition Exeter, held a meeting in October 2019 when many of the councils in Devon were just beginning to confront the climate emergency, to pass motions and make plans about what they could do. And so it felt like a good time now to put together another meeting where we can share what has been achieved, what are the difficulties, and what our various experiences have been. And so we're going to hear from our speakers. We will have 2 periods in breakout groups, one just to meet each other and another to talk with councils of similar size. And I know everybody here isn't from a council, but no doubt you do have relationships with your local council, and we encourage you to talk more with them in the session. So helping me, we have Roxy Piper from New Prosperity Devon. Do you want to briefly introduce yourself, Roxy?
Yeah, hi there. Yes, I'm from New Prosperity Devon. I do the communications and other things. And I'm also a co-lead for Action on Climate in Teignbridge, Economy and Business Group. And just please note that we're recording this, so if you want to turn your video off and don't want to be in the recording, then please do so. But we won't be recording the discussions or the Q&A. So yeah, I'll hand back to you, Jill.
Yeah. That's great. So New Prosperity Devon has a YouTube channel, and you can see some of our past webinars, including the ones on community wealth building, on our YouTube channel if you would like to see that. And you'll be able to see the presentations here afterwards as well. So without further ado, I will introduce the speakers. We have with us Andrew Shadrake, who is one of the founders of Acting on Climate in Teignbridge. She's an independent consultant on all sorts of things, really, sustainability, social enterprise formation and governance, and he also works with Torbay Spark. We have Madeline Greenhouse of Green New Deal Devon. She's the founder of this and also works with Regen, so is very knowledgeable about energy and local energy. And we have Peter Lefort, who is the head of partnerships for Cornwall Council's Carbon Neutral Devon. And finally, Harry Bonnell from Devon Communities Together. And he's going to share with us a bit later the outcomes of a survey he's been doing of local councils on their climate action. If you have questions for any of the speakers, please feel free to put them in the chat. And if you put a Q first, it helps to identify them, and Roxy will be monitoring the questions. And who knows, some answers might appear in chat as well. It's there to share for us. So that's great. And I will start by handing over to Madeleine to introduce the subject.
Great, hi everyone, thanks Jill. Thanks everyone for having me here. No pressure as the first speaker, I'll try not to mess it up. So I'm going to talk to you for 5 minutes or so, just maybe hoping to set some of the context, I guess, for today and then help with the discussions later, give you some new ideas. So as Jill said, I'm Madeline Greenhouse. I'm a volunteer for Green New Deal Devon. I should say in my day job, I'm the policy lead for Regen, as Jill mentioned, so a renewable not-for-profit in Exeter, looking at renewable energy. So if you do have questions on energy, I will try and answer them, but I am here today as a volunteer for Green New Deal Devon. So just a little bit about Green New Deal, hopefully setting some of the context for you to help with some of the discussions. But I won't go into it too much because there's a lot of things about the Green New Deal to talk about. But we are part of Green New Deal UK. So Green New Deal is, UK is campaigning for a Green New Deal, trying to set up hubs across the UK regionally, and that's what we're doing here in Devon. So a Green New Deal itself, if you've probably already heard of the concept, but I think it's always helpful to hear it from different perspectives to see how we approach it because it's such a huge concept. So a Green New Deal is based on the New Deal coming from the 40s, out of the Great Depression in America, a massive plan of investment to help get them out of the Great Depression. And this is a similar thing, but in a green context. And actually looking at the COVID crisis, it's quite interesting to see how the similarities between the two situations we find ourselves in. So the Green New Deal is saying we need a massive, ambitious plan that doesn't just tinker around the edges. We want to look across a variety of issues. And I think it's quite interesting to frame it in terms of, if you try and solve the climate crisis through an environmental one, so just sticking some wind turbines somewhere or converting all the cars to electric vehicles, you know, you're missing a variety of issues underneath that, which have actually caused and shaped the climate crisis itself. So things like the way our economy has been shaped, the way power is concentrated into the hands of an elite few, justice issues like racial justice, social justice, workers' rights, medical justice, all these things we've seen exacerbated through the pandemic and are all causing the climate crisis and caused by this. So if we look at some of these environmental solutions on their own, then, you know, building wind turbines, creating electric vehicles, those decisions are left to the politicians, the scientists, the academics, the big businesses, and the average person is actually left out of that conversation. And the status quo, which is all these different issues I mentioned, which are causing the climate crisis, remain the same. And people, you know, we get some wind turbines and it's a frit on top, but actually our situation remains the same and the underlying causes remain the same. So I think it's really interesting when you look at that on a local level. So I think it opens up a much broader range of areas that council should and could focus on. So I think it's quite interesting to see what different kinds of areas you might be looking at beyond, you know, building wind turbines, etc. So looking at improving care provision. So creating sustainable, secure, needed green jobs that help us back out of the pandemic, but are long-term sustainable green jobs as well. Building better public transport. Now, you might, in your council, you might not have the role of and responsibility for buses and trains and things like that, but you could even improve the experience. So maybe just a better bus stop that gives people a better experience, that stops them from getting in their car when it's raining and helps them wait for the bus. You know, small things up to the big things as well. Agriculture, we live in Devon, so, you know, a rural area, lots of us are involved in rural issues. You know, how do you involve farmers in that and the agriculture and green spaces around us? And also looking to things like adaptation. So a lot of people don't like to talk about this because obviously we want to solve the climate crisis. Lots of people don't like to admit that actually it's upon us now and happening. So, but we need now and in the next few decades to help our local communities adapt to changing weather patterns. So how can local councils be involved in helping do that as well? So lots of different issues there to look at, but I think how we communicate all of that is really key. So I wanted to touch a bit on some of the work I've done with young people through Green New Deal Devon. The youth climate strikers are really closely involved in help setting up Green New Deal Devon. They've got their own Green New Deal. They're really passionate advocates for change. These are people who are, you know, 12 or 13 and upwards, who are looking at real social environmental changes. They're very passionate. They've set up the climate strikes, which I've been involved in. I'm sure many of you have seen as well. They're writing their own Green New Deal. They've got their own ideas. And the one thing I think is it's really interesting that comes through really clearly is their desire for change now. Not tomorrow, not in a few years' time, not in a few decades' time, not net zero by 2050. They want it now, and they're really not afraid to call out what they see as excuses and prevarication. And I hope none of you have been on the receiving end of that, but I think absolutely they're not afraid to tell it how they see it. So I think communicating that the action that you're taking is really key, showing what you can and can't do, to what your responsibilities are. For a lot of young people, that's not clear where those responsibilities lie. It's not to me, and I wouldn't class myself as a young person. So, you know, if you're not responsible for how many trains stop in your local area, you know, how can you improve the public transport experience, but also lobby hard to make sure that that those trains do stop in your area more. And focus on the tangible action you can take and involve the local community in taking those decisions, and involve young people in making those decisions, and then involve them in taking that action. So I think just some key things to take away: communicate clearly your roles and responsibilities as a council, involve people, young people, all of your community in those decisions and the action you're taking, and be creative about what you can do. Don't just look at the obvious areas, which are really hard and actually probably not your responsibility a lot of the time, but look at the things that will tackle the climate crisis, and improve people's lives at the same time. I realise that's not a small ask, but just a few different ideas to get us started for today, hopefully. I think you're still on mute, Gill.
That was great, Madeleine. Thank you so much for that introduction.
Andrew, if you could tell us, please, Andrew, a bit about the work of Acting on Climate in Teignbridge and what you've been able to achieve and what perhaps you might be able to offer that's of use elsewhere.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Gill, and hi everybody. It's really good to be with you. I'm sharing a screen, and so what I'm going to do is, I'm a member of Action on Climate in Teignbridge. So what I'm planning to do is to briefly tell you a little bit about what that organisation is and what it does, and how it might benefit other councils, or other councils might want to use the kind of model that it offers. I'm not saying this is the only way to get communities and councils to work together to address climate issues. It's merely a kind of a case study of one way, and there may be things that other councils can learn. There are also things that we can learn from other councils. This is a two-way thing. But if I just go through those 3 points, I'll describe a little bit about what Action on Climate in Teignbridge is, what it does, and benefits to councils, potentially other councils of using the same kind of model. It's going to be fairly rapid fire, but let's give it a go. So starting with, what is Action on Climate in Teignbridge? Well, it's the most important thing to say about it is that it is community-based. It's an organisation that started, if you like, as a result of a meeting a couple of years ago when 200 people attended in a school, and there were a number of presenters from different climate change organisations and individuals in the community. And also, and importantly, there was a presentation from Jackie Hook, who's also on this call and is the portfolio holder for the climate emergency at Teignbridge District Council. And that's important because what we were doing from the very start was creating an organisation which was co-created, if you like, with the council, not created separately from it and then facing up to the council and saying, hey, play with us. So I think that's one of the important features of ACT. The second one is that it is a company, it's a community interest company. It must exist to benefit the community, being the community of people in Teignbridge. This gives it a certain robustness and requires it to act within the law, which is, you know, you may say, well, yes, of course, Andrew, but that isn't necessarily always something that's taken into account by organisations that are of a looser format. And we've tried to reflect that robustness in the way that we've organised ourselves internally. Here's a short, quick summary of our organisational structure. So yes, obviously we have a board, but the way we've organised this is we have 5 themed groups, you can read them as well as I can, that address different issues, and a 6th in the other colour for public engagement. And each of those groups has a director represented on it. So what we're doing is we're finding a way to join the need to act responsibly and keep an eye on what's happening in all our groups and making sure we're all following the vision, at the same time as allowing people to develop the activities they want as long as they fit within that vision. So those lower down groups have lots of volunteers interested in a particular aspect rather than the whole thing. So that helps to give us a form which is acceptable. So that's what the organisation is, but what does it do? Well, the first thing it does is it acts as a single point of contact for organisations based in Teignbridge who are interested in the environment and in working with the council. So rather than all those organisations separately approaching the council for action, we're able to provide a route, a conduit. Of course, they can still go directly, but the point is very often the council might refer them to us because we have the resource and information and can support them. And in other cases, they might come direct to us and we can supply them with that support. So being a single point of contact has simplified life, I think, for the council. We'll find out later. The second thing we do related to the local authority is that We have liaison meetings. This matters. We have monthly liaison meetings, which currently are on Zoom, trousers optional, when we talk about different things that the council is doing and how the community organisation might be able to support them. And clearly the other way around, where we're doing something and we're looking to get publicity or to benefit from the fact that we're supported, not by money, but by partnership from a district council, which is an important thing, makes a big difference to community action and when we're applying for funding. So those liaison meetings, and they also, the other advantage of these liaison meetings is it means we don't have some kind of relationship that was formalized 2 years ago and every so often we ring you up and say, hey, what are we going to do? We're actually talking all the time. And I think that active interaction makes a big difference. So that's one of the things that we do. Another thing we do is to supply a resources pack for town and parish councils. This glorious slide is simply obviously a screenshot from our website. And it is useful for councils that haven't yet declared because it gives information on how to declare and what that means. But more importantly, I think a lot of councils that haven't declared, and very many have, a lot of parish councils that haven't declared haven't done so because it's all very well to declare a climate emergency. But then people turn around and say, fine, you've declared, now what are you going to do about it? And so if they're not careful, they might create a rod for their own backs. And so what we've been able to do is to supply information about how they can act after a declaration. So that's something that we've done, which has been very helpful to some councils. And the other thing we do, we've recently started a wildlife warden scheme. I highlight this because, yes, it's been on Spotlight, but it's been a surprisingly popular thing, far more popular than I thought it was going to be. I thought it'd be good, but it's remarkable. Lots and lots of people want to become involved in a scheme where we have wildlife wardens who are volunteers in each parish. Well, they will be, we hope, in each parish. We've got 46 parishes, so it'll take a while, in Teignbridge, and they lead activities of whatever sort they want that's to do with biodiversity and environment. They might be counting species and working with the Devon Records Office on looking at what species are where. They might be working with local volunteers to have wildflower hedgerows or wildflower verges, or whatever else is of interest to that particular group. What we supply is a form and training for doing this kind of thing safely and legally. We have health and safety training. We provide the insurance. We provide a lot of technical knowledge on just different aspects of ecology to groups that are starting. And we also have a volunteer coordinator. When I say a volunteer coordinator, what I mean is a person who is paid to coordinate volunteers. They can do so many hours a week, and it's funded by a lot of support from different individual councillors through the council pot, and also from Devon Environment Foundation and Dartmoor National Park. So that's something that's starting and is growing very fast, I have to say. Fine, so that's a couple of examples of what we do. Now let's turn to benefits to councils of this kind of an approach. Well, the first thing is that councils, and this won't be the first time you've come across this concept, are stretched for resources, whether it's money or people or time or whatever else. And one thing that we can supply in ACT is expertise on aspects of addressing the climate emergency that the council doesn't have in-house. We are fortunate in having people who are very good mathematicians, engineers, understand the concept of emissions and how you allocate them. And that's been very helpful to the council, for example, in its review of its local plan to make sure that, for example, if they're requiring developers to put mitigation measures in place, those mitigations actually have a useful effect. So we supply some complementary support to the council's extensive skills in other areas. The second thing is that we are a critical friend, and you will have seen that what I've done is to try and show the word critical small and the word friend big. Because when you hear the term critical friend, the mind focuses on the word critical. And that, I think, is most unfortunate. Yes, we do comment and criticize where it's needed, offer support where it's needed. But the point is, we do this in partnership. Where we're saying something maybe not quite right, we'd see if we can help to fix it. So it's a friend brackets critical where required. And we do free stuff. Councils, as I said, very restrained in capacity. And so what we do is wherever we can, we enable communities and volunteers in communities to do things, whether it's through that wildlife warden scheme, through supplying written information like the resource pack, or through other activities such as we've got a series going in the Mid-Devon Advertiser in the paper about different aspects of the climate emergency. These are things that councils don't really have the resource to do themselves. And so we're providing activity which councils don't have to pay for. So those are the three things I wanted to talk about. Now, I should say, that all sounds great, doesn't it? Well, it ain't perfect. We are officially not perfect. We are a work in progress. We're trying to do what we can. All I'm really saying here is that there may be some aspects of what we do which are of interest elsewhere. Equally, we'd love to learn from other areas what we can do better. So we aren't perfect, but I think the key thing for any organization, any community, any council that wants to emulate any of what we've done is that you need to have these four things in place. If you've got respect for each other, you then develop a willingness to collaborate, you can co-create things, but it all has to be based on a foundation of trust. That is all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrew. That's really great to hear. I'm going to use my reactions thing here at the bottom of the screen. So without further ado, I'm going to pass to Peter. And if you have questions for any of the speakers, pop them in the chat. Over to you, Peter.
Thanks, Jill. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. So I'm going to share my screen as well. So this is what I've been asked to talk a little bit about, what we're doing in Cornwall. So I'm the sector and partnerships lead for the Carbon Neutral Cornwall team in Cornwall Council. And I'm going to talk a bit about how we are making decisions and collaborating within the context of the climate emergency. So a bit of context at first. So within Cornwall, we have a lot of things we are quite susceptible to around deprivation. Our coastline is very vulnerable to storms, to rising water levels, and our supply chains for food, for other things, for medicine, all sorts of things are vulnerable. And these are things that are likely to be exacerbated by the climate emergency. So kind of this is the context in which we're looking at our target, which is to become carbon neutral by 2030. So that's Cornwall Council, which is certainly achievable, and Cornwall as a whole, which is much more ambitious. But we're trying to embed this in real world challenges that Cornwall is facing. So to put that into a bit of more kind of practical application, this graphic and there's going to be a bit of overlap between some of you might have seen me talk about this before, but I will get to some new bits later on. But so this graphic talks about, okay, well, what do we actually do with that? The climate emergency is huge, it's complex. How do we actually process that? And what I want you to take from this image is, so we're moving along the grey line from left to right. And as you can see, we're getting concentrically closer and closer towards carbon neutrality. So that's our map for the next 10 years or more, getting closer and closer to carbon neutrality. But at some point, we have to hold the possibility that that might change, that carbon neutrality will no longer be the driver. It might be something else because of new possibilities, new opportunities, new threats that might come along. And if we only focus on carbon neutrality, then we run the risk of losing sight of the bigger picture, which is, well, what's the change we're actually trying to enact? And that is to create a just, thriving and resilient Cornwall. That's central to the aims of Cornwall Council. And that's got to be at the core of what we're doing. So yes, we can kind of have carbon neutrality as the sort of the complicated problem that we're trying to solve. We can measure it to a large extent. We can put baselines in. We can monitor that on an ongoing basis. We can kind of frame how we're addressing that. But there is still this complex challenge of why are we actually trying to do this in the first place? And we need to balance those things at the same time, which is not easy when it comes to decision making within the sort of fairly traditional frame of a local authority. So one of the ways we've done this is by adapting the donut economics model developed by Kate Raworth, economist, and this looks at how do we hold complexity? How do we look at this challenge in a way that actually helps us step back, see a wider perspective, and not get too focused on the loudest problems at any one time. So here, if you haven't seen it, we have the kind of ecological ceiling on the outside. So we can only go so far before we've got no planet yet left to live on and to use. But we've also got the social foundation on the inside, where people need a certain level of resources of society to function, to thrive. And if we go too far one way or the other, then we threaten the kind of the livelihoods of everyone. I'm often starting with the most vulnerable. So what we need is this green donut in the middle, which is where the model gets its name, this safe and just space for humanity in the center. So it's a balancing act. And the key thing to bring in kind of complexity here is that what complexity teaches is that there are no right answers to these questions. To a complex problem, there is no right answer that we have to find. There are better answers for sure, and there are better perspectives. But if we trick ourselves into thinking that there are right answers, then we will be lost. So the way we've done this, way we tried to apply this is, so within Cornwall Council, every decision that goes through Cabinet, so this circle here represented within the governance of Cornwall Council, so a fairly significant part of the decision-making processes, every decision that goes through Cabinet since September of 2019 uses this decision wheel. So you can see the visual similarity to the donut economics model. And I'm not going to talk in too much detail about this because I've done that before. And if you want to know the kind of the nuts and bolts of this, I'll share in the chat a longer talk I've done that goes into this in a lot more detail. But the principle here is looking at, okay, well, how do we make decisions within complexity, within the climate emergency? We need to step back. We need to look at everything. And a big part of that, two aspects to it. One is understanding what we don't know. Where do we just simply not have the data and the evidence? In our little breakout room before, we were talking about, this can sometimes be quite paralyzing. It is complicated. You feel like you need to know all of the information. And for decision makers, whether that's in a community group or whether that's in a local authority or in national government, it's important for everybody to acknowledge what they don't know. Otherwise, we will make the same decisions and the same mistakes that we've always made. So here you can see the grey areas are the bits where we simply don't have that information of how, whatever this project is. So here the case studies of an active travel project. We don't know what the impact is going to be. It doesn't mean there isn't there. It means we don't know. And the other key thing here is the bits in yellow, because how this model works is you kind of ask and answer a series of questions for each area, give then a score. And that score is translated into the colours that you see. So yellow is suggesting a short-term or limited negative impact. And it's really important in our decision-making, we understand every decision we make is going to have a negative impact somewhere. If we think we're making a decision that is perfect or is positive in every area, then we simply don't know what we're talking about. We need to go back and think about it. It's not trying to prevent those negative side effects. That happens in a complex system. It's about understanding them and making them transparent, because that's how we get collaboration, and that's how we try and strive to do better. So kind of to move on from that into a bit more specifics about why this model works, why I think it's really good, is that it's there are some limitations with that. As I've mentioned, it's subjective. It's only a tool. It's as good as the people that use it. It's not exhaustive. It can only predict. It can't measure. But in terms of what does work, is it does help people understand nuance and grasp complexity in a really good way, and a way that is transparent, and a way that is innovative. And obviously, often people like innovation, for better, for worse. But it's about a first step in behaviour change in governance. I think that's really important. So I also want to talk about collaboration. So this is a great example of how collaboration across an area like Cornwall can work, because the model is completely adaptive. Here's some examples of different ways people have used it around the world. And we're trying to encourage businesses, the NHS, community groups to use this model as well, not in the same way that we're using it, but in a way where we're asking the same questions, maybe coming up with different answers, but using a similar model that allows us to collaborate across difference. And so to speak a little bit about collaboration and the way we're approaching it, there's two elements to it. So we need those practical actions. We need the things that actually talk about the mitigation and the adaptation and the things that we can measure and get us closer to carbon neutrality, these kind of complicated bits. But we also need the complex transformational change, because there's only so much we can do, only so far we can go by kind of clutching at the low-hanging fruit. The system needs to change. And I think anyone who's not kind of talking about that needs to sort of go away and think about it a bit more, because there are big problems ahead and there are big things we need to do, which is not to say that we cannot do it, but we need to look at things both in the details, but in the bigger picture. So to think about that practically, so for organizations, we always have to think about, what are the incentives? And these might be carrots, they might be sticks, it might be funding, it might be policy. But we also have to think about, are those incentives here now? Are they inevitably going to be to come? Are they things we can confidently predict, or are they only hypothetical? And how do we move that on? How do we relate to those things? And acknowledging that resilience can only really come when we act together, because one individual organization taking action on its own runs a risk of being left behind, of being abandoned. So we need to act collectively in that. And secondly, we need to make those details accessible. So the practical actions need to be very practical and step by step, but we also need to understand the tensions inherent. Why haven't these things happened? If you create an action plan, it might be a list of things that you've known should have happened for 10 years, but why haven't they happened? We need to explore those things. What are the blocks? What are the barriers? And I put here from consensus to consent, and I just want to kind of explore that briefly. Often kind of action plans and collaborations are built about this idea of consensus. We need to find that point where everybody is happy with what we're doing. But actually what that can lead to is a real watering down of what we're able to do. So if you move towards consent, it's about tolerance, not about preference, but tolerance. Not everybody is going to be happy with the decisions that are made, but equally not everybody's going to be happy with the implications of the climate emergency anyway. We have to let go of that idea and find consent. That gives us a bigger range in which we can work. And the last thing I want to say is just this idea of distributed leadership, which I'm trying to work on within Cornwall, and this idea that we're trying to move along this journey. So we start with centralized, so Cornwall Council, for example, is in the middle of that. It's a very traditional leadership role. Everything has to come through us, funding, other things like that, policy. Moving then towards a decentralized model where we recognize other leaders and collaborate with them, and they are influencing others. And that's a great step, but we want to get towards this more distributed model where everybody knows their role in the system and can act on it, and no one leader kind of is above anywhere else. That's really complex. I don't know how we do that, but that's where we're working towards. And I think as a visual, this is quite a helpful way of looking at it. So slightly over my 10 minutes, but thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Peter. That's some inspiring things, and it's great to have the visuals to go with it. I'm now going to ask Harry if you're ready. Harry, you've been working at a kind of different level and talking to parish councils. What can you tell us that you found from them?
Hi, Jill. Thank you. Really good hearing both of you, or all of the speakers so far. Thank you. So I work for Devon Communities Together. We are formerly the Community Council of Devon, and we have a history of working to support neighbourhood plans and community consultations around Devon. We've been managing some of the COVID response work, support networks, and also resilience planning. And through this, a few parish councillors approached us with the idea of a similar sort of support network, but for climate emergency response. So just before Christmas, we sent out a survey to all parish councils. It's still ongoing until the 1st of February. So this is just a survey of initial findings, sorry, a presentation of initial findings so far. And the idea being this can help support our work to develop a network, see if there's a demand for a network, and understand what position people are currently at in their work. So hopefully I can click there, and there we go. So to see who responded, we had a mix of town and parish councils, but the majority sort of with a population of sub 1,000 people. And the majority coming from identifying as their parish being in a rural village, rural countryside pick multiple options here, but just to give you an indication who's responded so far. I will fly through this because I've only got a few minutes, as I say, but just maybe I'll spark some thoughts in your mind. I'm sorry you can't read all of these fully. The orange line there is to show very concerned, and blue slightly concerned, and this was to look at, you know, we often talk about the interrelations of the climate emergency: biodiversity, greenhouse gas emissions, waste reduction, and also the more personal, as Peter said, inequalities that might arise, such as fuel poverty coming up. So I personally just found this interesting. We asked people to identify what are concerns of their community, and a lot of councillors pointed out that they can't necessarily talk about their community fully because they haven't done a survey to consult their community, so it's their impressions of their community. But I found it interesting that that waste reduction, you know, plastic waste and food waste are, you know, perceived as the biggest concern, whereas, you know, greenhouse gas emissions still a concern, but there's just awareness raising of, you know, everyone talks about plastic extensively, and rightly so, but I just found it interesting that that was there, and the personal inequalities, you know, not quite perceived as highly as a concern as some of the other issues. Found it interesting in the responses, people saying about, you know, it's the day-to-day problems that are visible that are concerning people, and I think that applies on a local level quite clearly. Again, pollution from tourism being a concern. These are just some quotes from the survey so far. And then again, without a full survey, it's difficult to gauge opinions. Some people are very concerned, some not concerned at all. We asked people whether they were interested in further support, and 78% indicated that they say one of the main intentions of the survey was to understand the sorts of support we could offer, with these two columns on the right here being of interest to me, especially at this stage, is we're thinking about learning networks, and we were wondering whether, you know, Devon county-wide learning networks or more localised networks were of interest. So that is there. You can see the localised networks more of interest at this stage, and 43% of people said that they would be interested in being representative on a, or sending a representative from their parish to a Devon network of councils to support each other with topics of climate emergency. So that's, you know, that's really encouraging. And 49% said they were not sure, but are potentially interested but want more information. So really encouraging, and shows the desire for sharing between each other and supporting each other. This donut, so to speak, if you read from the green segment round to clockwise, it sort of follows in order. So the question was, where are you currently addressing, or what are you currently doing to address the climate emergency? And, you know, the green segment there, we've not started acting and don't understand the need. Significantly, the largest section there, we have not started taking action, but we do understand the need to take action. The issue has been raised and we're working towards action. We have officially declared a climate emergency, but have not begun amending our policies, is what that reads. We have officially declared a climate emergency and have begun amending our policies, which I'd be interested to talk about further in maybe some of the chats. The role of policies, you know, fitting different scales and different sizes of parishes, what can fit there. And then finally here, we've started developing a full action plan. Again, sorry to just fly through things. I will caveat that this is a survey that hasn't closed yet, and I haven't really had time to fully analyse the information. But we asked people if they've started taking action, which areas have you started working on, and I've highlighted the highest responses there. So we've considered topics in existing parish plan or neighbourhood plan. You've got here the 6th one along, which is we've formed focused working groups, which was quite common. You know, that seems to be a common next step, just starting to form working groups to address different areas, different topics. For example, like Andrew showed us with the breakdown of working groups they've got there. We've started awareness raising communications amongst our community, massive role for that. And then at the end here, which is something that Devon Communities Together has been supporting, the development of a resilience plan, which has again been mentioned before. So we've got to put a timer on, so I don't know how I'm doing for time, I'm sorry. These are just some quotes here of what people have been have said about their action. So they've planned certain things, but it was interrupted due to COVID, things like energy saving events, and that was quite a common response, starting that awareness raising. Interestingly here, people saying they're not sure what they can do because they're from a small parish, a parish small, no assets, so they're just focusing on how the residents themselves can reduce their carbon footprint. And importantly, I like this one saying, you know, the parish council has started to link up with a greener parish group. So connecting with the existing groups in the area doing the work is an important step. I like that one. Sorry, lots of information on a screen, not ideal, but this is which area would you be interested in seeking support on? Relevant for us as a charity that works on consultation and engagement work quite heavily, as to help people develop their plans, is this one around community consultation being of significant need, really identified so far. Again, also awareness raising and communications, and again that can be done in many ways, but that is an interesting need. As I say, once the survey is closed and we've analysed it, it will be available for people to see the findings and everything more. This is just some of the comments again about what needs, what support needs there are, and the difficulties. I'm going to just leave them there. Hopefully you have a chance to scan those. There's some, again, demand for sharing and not reinventing, you know, the wheel, but sharing between each other. The concern about, you know, what is viable as a council, again, so that I think relates to scale once more. Information about, you know, how to develop an action plan and what is suitable for an action plan as well. And then finally, just here, again, pointing to not knowing sort of what issues are relevant in a small community and how to apply that. I put here final questions of, you know, working with others, because I think it's really important to identify this, working from a place of strength, working from a place of networking. So we asked to help us map existing initiatives, but also just to get people thinking about what initiatives are near them, to name any groups they know of in the local area which are already working to address some of the issues raised above, and just an example answer there, you know, just to get you thinking, what are your existing, you know, networks? I like this answer. You know, there's a repair cafe, there's a food shed, there's a nature reserve. These are all services the parish council could start reaching out to, start to link with and connect with. And then similarly, we asked any other existing expertise you feel you may be able to draw upon within your council. So not necessarily organisations, but experts, and again, drawing on a position of strength within your council or within your parish, sorry. Within their parish, this is one person's answer. You know, you've got financial secretaries, gardeners, horticultural experts, drainage experts, hands-on people that you can draw upon. So that is all I've got to say for now. I'm really interested to be involved in some of the chat and thinking about how we can start to piece all the different work together and support each other. So thank you very much.